For as long as I could remember, I've had the phrase, "you will grow into a fine person," embedded into the back of my mind. For some reason, that made me look at life a bit differently than most. I was never worried about what kind of job I held down, or making any serious mistakes in my life. That one sentence was my truth. No matter what happened or what I did, as long as I was still alive, I would become a fine person. It was only recently I found out who told me that phrase and why I should have cared more about putting some sort of purpose to my life. I'd come into my money. On a whim, I bought a lottery ticket when I was at the corner store getting a cold drink. I had never actually bought a ticket for myself. I would go into lottery pools at work or buy some tickets for my family, but never one for myself. It was a bit out of character, but I never considered guessing why I bought it, even after I won. The amount was enough for me to live comfortably if I was careful with my spending. I could retire before my mid-20s, even after giving my parents a share so they could retire as well. I was never close with my parents, and I had no reason for the emotional distance. I love them, sure, but I can never bring myself to go out of my way to do things like meet up for family dinners or play catch in front of the yard with my father. They didn't seem too bothered with the distance. I was a fairly lonely person, very much the type to go missing and not have someone notice for 3 months. With my newly filled bank account, I decided first thing was to find a better place to live. My apartment wasn't in the best area, but it was affordable. Now I could afford a place with 16 bathrooms if I liked, but I figured that to be a waste if I was alone. I did some house hunting alone and found a nice place with a reasonable price. I hadn't even bothered getting a new car yet. I still owned a near the end of its life truck I bought for a few $100. It was good enough for me to get to the open house that day, but I never got to the location I picked out. Despite living in the same city my entire life, I got lost. I somehow ended up on a side street. It was a nice neighborhood. The sidewalks cracked, the area looking like it was stuck years in the past. But it was nice. Each front yard was huge, big enough to host a tree that towered over every other house. Although I had gotten lost, I felt like I knew this neighborhood. I slowly drove down the street looking for a place to park so I could use my phone to get directions to the open house. Because I was going so slowly, when a dog ran out into the weather-worn road, I was at no risk to hit it. From where the small dog came running, a child followed behind. She was calling after the dog and not watching where she was going. I had stopped my truck in the empty street and watched as the poor girl tripped over the curb, smashing a knee. She wailed for a dog and over a new scrape. Her father, I assumed, came running out from the house to go to her side. In a strange daze, I stopped my truck and got out. "Is she alright?" I called out. "She's fine. Did you see where our dog went?" the father asked after he picked up his sobbing daughter. I did see where the dog went. He had run down the driveway and I guessed into the backyard of the place across the street. "I'll try and find him," I offered and took off trying to track the small white dog down. The driveway ended in a gate that was ajar. I heard barking and hoped the owners forgave me for trespassing. It only took a minute or two to collect the dog and start back towards the road. But the owners of the house must have seen a stranger come into the backyard. A man came out onto the porch to see what the fuss was about, followed behind with a woman. "Sorry to go into your backyard. I just wanted to get him back," I apologized. They looked between each other, not looking worried exactly, but had a stressed look I couldn't place. I returned the dog to his owners, and the little girl stopped sobbing when she had him in her arms again. Her knee looked bloody, but she no longer cared. Her father thanked me for the effort and took them inside to get his child cleaned up. The couple on the other side of the road was still on their porch. I gave them a wave. "Sorry again." "No problem. Was the gate unlocked? I swore I'd closed it," the man asked. He looked at least 10 years older than myself and kind. It was a little open. Maybe the latch is broken, I suggested. He gave me a friendly shrug, and I got back into my truck. I was still parked in the road, but the street I was on looked like it didn't get any kind of traffic. I picked up my phone to try and get some directions, but for some strange reason, it didn't turn on. I fiddled with it for a few moments, and finally gave up. The couple hadn't gone inside, but instead stayed to talk to each other. I felt bad for interrupting, but I was still lost after all. Do you two know how I can get to Main Street? I got turned around and I'm late for an open house. For a moment, the woman looked a bit pale. She recovered and just gave me a friendly smile. Just go left at the end of the road and keep going straight. You'll see the turn for it. If you hit the big hill, you've gone too far. If your open house doesn't work out, get turned around again and come back here. We're considering on moving. After her partner spoke, the woman took his hand and gripped it tight. In that moment, I didn't notice how tight, or that she was suddenly forcing a smile. I figured she was just stressed over the idea of moving. I was stressed even though the process would be easy. Sure, would you mind giving me your number? I got a nod, and the man went inside and came back with a sticky note. He had jotted down his number and their names. He handed it to me through my truck window. I gave him a thanks and doubted I would ever see them again as I drove off. I didn't arrive to the open house. The street had been blocked off by emergency vehicles, and I watched in shock at the dark smoke billowing out from where I guessed the for sale house in question was located. I hoped no one had gotten hurt. What bad luck for the owners. I was too lazy to start up my job hunting again. Instead, the next day, I called the nice couple I'd met. They offered to let me come by and look at the house whenever I liked. They were Henry and Carol Jones, both perfectly lovely people. Henry gave me a big handshake the moment he saw me. Carol had gotten cookies and juice ready for us. They showed me around the house, and I could tell they had done a major cleaning spree for me. I felt flattered over all the kind attention, but at the same time, just below the surface, they looked stressed. Laid off from work, Henry said, explaining their strange mood. I guessed he saw that I knew they were stressed. Happening to a lot of people. That's why we want the place sold fast. We found a perfect place for us. Doesn't cost much. We'll be happy for the rest of our lives there. I looked at the living room. It smelled clean, and the summer sun came through the large open windows. I hadn't been in the house before, but oddly, it felt like home. It felt like I was meant to be there. I would be glad to be able to help out a good pair of people. I could afford to pay double their asking price, triple if they let me. The living room had faded and the wallpaper slightly peeled. I ran my hand over the top of it, taking in the thought of me living there. And I liked the thought. Alright, how do we get this sale started? It was another month until Henry and Carol could officially move out. I was fine with that. I came over and helped them pack. At some point, I was spending more time over at their place than my own apartment. I'd bought the place, but it was still their home for the time being. I greatly enjoyed their company and hoped they weren't moving far. During that month, something was bothering me. Something so minor, I didn't feel like troubling them with it. It wasn't something troubling, just strange. I was the type of person to not dream or not remember them when I woke up. But for that month, I was dreaming. I was younger, maybe 6 with my parents. We drove, looking at different houses, and finally arrived at Henry's and Carol's place. I knew by the wallpaper. I had been sat on the couch, eating a cookie while my parents talked boring adult stuff. My cookie was finished, and I was ready to cause trouble when someone handed me another cookie. I couldn't see their face in the dream, but I knew they were the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. I can only have one, my 6-year-old self told the stranger. It's all right, I won't tell. I couldn't tell the person's gender. Their voice sounded like a waterfall in spring, something so soft and yet had a hint of a cold edge. The hair was done up in complex braids and pulled back. It was an odd colour I can't describe, yellow that shimmered green. "Do you live here?" I asked the person. "I do, with a lot of people. Would you like to move in?" I always woke up at that point. I stayed in bed trying to recall anything more. The person's face, my answer, anything. But I was stuck. It felt like it was all on the tip of my tongue. The final day of packing came. The three of us stared at the boxes, and I felt like Henry and Carol meant more to me than my own parents in the course of the month. "Please, don't go too far. Come and visit any time you like," I told them, trying to act like an adult and fight back tears. "Oh, don't worry. We'll always be here." We all gave each other a crushing hug, and I had to leave to organise moving on my own end of things. I wished I'd stay longer, because I never saw Henry and Carol again. I got moved in, all alone for a few weeks. I got into a routine of sleeping, eating and reading. My life was pretty boring. I did try and fix it by calling my two friends, but the number they gave me didn't go through. I didn't freak out at first. They might not have gotten things set up yet. But as time went by, and I still couldn't track them down, I started to get worried. But they were adults. I liked them. But they were, in a way, strangers. I had no right to track them down if they didn't want to see me. I would give them some more time to contact me first. As more time passed, I started to get anxious. I even considered hiring a private detective to track them down. I had the funds, but that was just a crazy thought. They were just busy adjusting, job hunting, or just relaxing. No reason to go over the deep end. I decided to keep myself sane, I would get myself some sort of hobby. The house was older, but in pretty good condition. For some reason, Henry and Carol had taken off the wallpaper in the living room right before I arrived. The whole house smelled of fresh paint for a few days after I moved in. I missed that wallpaper and wished they'd left it. I sat on the couch in the middle of the day on my phone, looking at tutorials on how to apply wallpaper, when I heard a voice. "You don't like the new wall colour?" I jolted up out of the couch, heart beating out of my chest. I relaxed, seeing who was speaking. It was the person I dreamed about. So I must have fallen asleep on the couch. But in the dreams, I couldn't see the person's face. But now, I could. It was a perfect face. So perfect and so beautiful, it couldn't be real. I was scared again. I started to sweat when they took one step towards me, their limbs strangely a bit too long, fingers too thin, and nails too pointed. Sharp, perfect teeth smiling at me, and eyes glittering, watching as I stood up on my shaking feet. "Who?" I croaked, but my throat was suddenly dry. "You'll grow into a fine person," the person, no, creature, answered back in a voice tinkling with a bell-sounding laugh. I got a sudden case of vertigo. I clutched at the couch arm to stay upright. I had spoken to this thing when I was a child. The memories came flooding back. I sat on the couch eating a cookie it gave me, and I had answered I very much would like to live in that house. "I think I could love you when you're older. If I give you the means to purchase this house when you're older, would you come back here? Would you live with me, with us? I would like to fill this house with people I love." The creature had told me so many years ago. "What if I don't use the money to buy the house? What if I buy toys instead?" My child self answered back. "Oh, I know you won't. That's something a bad person would do. I don't like bad people. I know one thing about you. You'll grow into a fine person. My legs shook and I felt myself nearly giving into a faint. That thing had the same smile as it did then. I felt it place one hand on my shoulder and I wanted to shake it off. But to my horror, I realised I liked the hand there. I couldn't look at the far too perfect face. I was under its spell. I had a fluttering in my stomach, the start of an adoration I knew would spell my end. No matter what I did, I knew in time I would love this monster, and the truth made my stomach turn. "Where's Henry and Carol?" I asked weakly, not looking up. I wanted to cling onto my sanity for a few more minutes. The creature let out a laugh. It wrapped its long thin limbs around me, and I was unable to struggle. My body accepted it as my mind screamed to fight back. They never left. No one leaves this place. I like that. Filling up houses with people I love. Once you've accepted my suggestion to live with me, you'll never leave either. Sadly, houses fill up so fast. I was glad I'm able to get a few more into this one before I move on to the next. My throat tightened and tears started to sting my eyes. I suddenly understood why the living room wall looked so freshly redone, and why Henry and Carol looked so concerned during their final days, and why they put off moving for as long as they could, and why I could no longer contact them. The creature holding me noticed my tears and held me tighter, shushing me and petting my head like one would do with a dog. I've lived here for a while, with whatever it is. I order food in, and I don't need to work. Just me, that creature that loves me, and whoever else is trapped inside this house out of sight. Most of my time is spent in the living room, talking to Henry and Carol, expecting the empty room to answer back. Whatever brought me here either has gotten bored of me, or didn't love me as much as it thought it would. When it thinks I'm not listening, I've heard it on the phone, calling up to plan an open house in the future. I may not have a lot of time left before it picks someone else, but at the very least, I won't ever be alone in this house.